Reflexive verbs. What are reflexive verbs? Reflexive verbs are special verbs in which the doer of the action and the receiver of the action are the same person. For example, if vestirse is a reflexive verb, it means that one dresses oneself. The person doing the dressing is putting the clothing on him or herself. If a person were dressing a baby, for example, then it would not be a reflexive verb. The subject of the sentence and the direct object of the sentence are always the same person with reflexive verbs. Examples of Spanish reflexive verbs are levantarse, in which the person is getting himself up, cortarse el pelo, in which the person is cutting her own hair rather than going to the beauty salon, lavarse la cara, in which the person is washing his own face. What is not a reflexive verb would be things like comer. One eats food, not oneself. Escribir, you write down words, you don't write yourself. Bailar, you dance a dance, not yourself. What do reflexive verbs look like? Reflexive verbs are made up of two parts, the verb and a pronoun. For example, despertarse means to wake up. Despertar is the verb and se is the pronoun. The infinitive that we see in the dictionary has the pronoun se attached to the end. Examples might be vestirse, to get dressed, levantarse, to get up, cepillarse, to brush. In real life, the pronouns, even on the infinitives, must match the doer of the action. Let's review the first reflexive verb you learned, llamarse. On your first day of Spanish 1, you were asked, ¿Cómo te llamas? You quickly learned to say, Me llamo Marcos. You didn't know it then, but this was your first reflexive verb. Me llamo and te llamas are examples of what we're learning to work with now. Now, how are reflexive verbs conjugated? The infinitive conjugates like any other verb. It may be a regular verb, a stem-changing verb, or an irregular verb. The pronoun, when we conjugate, is moved to the front of the verb and is changed to match the doer of the action. The reflexive pronouns are me, te, se, nos, os, and se. When we conjugate a reflexive verb, we take the pronoun from the end of the infinitive and move it to the front of the conjugated verb. We also always use the pronoun that matches the subject of the verb. So if I is the subject of the verb, then the pronoun me would be placed in front of the yo form of the verb. If they or ellos were the subject of the sentence, then we would use a se pronoun in front of the they form of the verb. Now, what is the process for conjugating reflexive verbs? Let's look at one. Let's look at levantarse. Now, in order to conjugate levantarse, we need our regular AR endings, because levantar is a regular AR verb, and we also need our reflexive pronouns. Now we need to remember that levantarse, even though we write it as one word, is really two. Levantar is our verb in its infinitive form, and se is the pronoun. Okay, now to conjugate this, the first thing we're going to do is take the pronoun se and move it to the front of the verb. Now you notice that we're trying to create the yo form of the verb, and se, even though it is a reflexive pronoun, is not the one that matches the yo form of the verb. So we need to change the se to me. Now, levantar is a regular AR verb. So the first thing we're going to do is take off the AR. This gives us our stem. We're going to write that stem after the may. Now notice that there's a space between may and the stem because now we're doing two words. They're only written as one word when it's an infinitive. Now we're going to take the o, that's our regular ending for the yo form, and we're going to bring it down. And I have me levanto. That is the yo form of, or the conjugated form of levantarse. Now we're going to use this same process with the to form, the he, she, usted form, etc. We're going to take the te from the reflexive pronouns, we're going to use the stem we've just used, and we're going to use the appropriate ending, which in this case will be as. And so we write te levantas. To do the he, she, usted form, we do se levanta. The we form, nos levantamos. The vosotros form, this is the one you're not usually required to memorize, but you do need to recognize it, would be os levantáis. And the ustedes form, or the ellos, ellas form, would be se levantan. So the process for the actual conjugation is identical. What's changed is we've added in front of the conjugated forms of the verb the pronouns me, te, se, nos, os, and se. This may seem confusing, but as you practice, this will become more and more normal.